Welcome to the Music Licensing Podcast. I'm your co-host, Sonnet Simmons.
And I'm John Kleinbell. Each week we sit down with top professionals in the sync world to discuss their experiences and offer inside insights on what it takes to place song to picture.
From music supervisors to ad agency executives, from trailer houses to indie artists racking up licenses with their music, we'll be talking to all of the people who make the sync magic happen.
Music is the backbone of a successful film or TV show.
It's all about finding the right fit for the right song, for the right moment.
I think the key to success in music licensing is really building relationships.
If you're passionate about music and the business behind making compelling media, this is the podcast for you.
Join us each week as we dive into the fascinating world of sync and explore it with the people it takes to make it all click.
The Music Licensing Podcast, where business meets the art of storytelling in media.
Are you loving the information shared by our guests and hungry for more? Consider becoming a patron of the podcast. Our patrons get exclusive access to extra content from our guests each month. We have bonus content in our Patreon page that is only for our patrons. For $3 a month, you get this access and you help support us bring this podcast to you each week. You can go to musiclicensingpodcast.com to become a patron today and get extra access.
Hey, my friends, welcome back to the Music Licensing Podcast. Today, we are sitting down with music supervisor Julian Drucker, and we are talking about the projects that he's been working on and the incredible world of music supervision and how it relates to the independent artist. Julian's work as a music supervisor and coordinator has been heard on so many shows like 911 Lone Star, Lessons in Chemistry, Made for Love, so many cool things. And there's a bunch of new ones that you're going to be listening to very soon that are out. And he was nominated by the Guild of Music Supervisors for the drum and bass drama Purple Beats. So you are not going to want to miss the incredible insights from Julian, who is a musician himself and also such an advocate for the indie music maker. Enjoy. All right, everybody, Julian Drucker in the house.
Hey there. Thanks, Sonnet.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So I was reading your bio and I learned some things about you that I didn't know about you before. I would love, and a lot of people on here are probably not familiar with you and your story and the work that you do. So let's just start with a quick little, who are you? What do you do? And what the little path or the long path that took you to where you are today?
Sure. So I'm Julian. I am a music supervisor primarily, and I am from New York City originally. I grew up with classical musicians as parents, so that was kind of the beginning of my exposure to music, was primarily through classical music, violinist and cellist, respectively, my dad and mom. So I got a lot of, and through my mom, I also got this wide appreciation for pop music and, the classic rock, R&B, everything under the sun. So when I kind of came into my own in high school, started playing music myself. It started as classical piano, but I would say that I was gravitating more towards playing and singing pop songs and the Beatles, and that was kind of where I started my own personal journey with music. And so becoming a music supervisor kind of derived from a practice of being a musician and just an appreciation for music from a practitioner's and appreciator's point of view. So I, to make this less of a long story, I basically studied musical theater composition in college, and that was another great sort of diversion that taught me a lot and gave me a lot of good life experience producing some of my own musicals. And then I moved to LA, which was kind of a leap of faith because I knew I wanted to work in music for the screen, but I didn't know exactly in what capacity. But I just figured that this is the place to do it, and I wanted an adventure after college. So I was like, off on my own, just doing the thing of interviewing for all kinds of jobs, trying to figure out what felt right. And luckily, music supervision was one of the few things at the top of my list where I was like, I don't know exactly what this is, but it sounds very cool. I had seen the credit in movies, just kind of figured that it's something that maybe would interest me, or at least that I'd have some kind of qualifications for. So I got an internship with Maggie Phillips, who is one of the sort of premier TV and film music supervisors. And she taught me so much. I got really lucky just to land that opportunity. And I became her assistant fairly quickly because her business was growing. And so everybody, sort of the team expanded. And so there was room for all of us to contribute creatively. But I also kind of got the very important nuts and bolts lessons of clearance and negotiation and administrative work that comes with the job. So Maggie was an amazing first mentor. And actually, in that first month that I moved to LA, before I got the internship, I had met another music supervisor named Amanda Krieg Thomas, who I then started to work for. After I left the job with Maggie, I ended up becoming Amanda's first hire.
Wow.
She started her own company, Yay Team Productions. And that was like 2018, early 2019. And I worked with her through the pandemic. So like 2 to 3 years or so as her coordinator, and then
Wow.
taking on more and more responsibility and co-supervising some stuff by the end. And then, so that was about 4 years of working for other music supervisors, really learning how it all goes. And I decided that I felt like I had the skills and sort of just the foundation, at least, to try to do it myself, which was, another bold choice, but I kind of decided that that's what felt right to me at the time. And I was lucky to have the opportunity at that point to supervise Love Island, the US version. So that was like my first kind of experience of supervising something kind of big on my own. I had
Mhm.
done some indie films during the time that I was with both Maggie and Amanda, just kind of to help friends or, just get that extra experience myself. But this was like my first real gig. And so then I did that. It was a great experience. I'm happy to talk about it. Although I know you've had Jordan Young on the show, so I know that you've heard about Love Island already.
Mm.
And
Can't hear enough about Love Island though, so
it's a fun show, yeah.
it's
Yeah, super fun. And so from there on, I just kind of ended up doing a mix of things, really like back to sort of scripted TV a lot of the time, especially with another supervisor that I now work with named Christine Green Rowe, who also worked for Maggie. And so the two of us met under her wing. And I also do stuff separately on my own still that, a lot of indie films as well, some documentaries, so here and there, like a trailer or an ad, kind of. There's a lot more variety now that I'm doing freelance, which has been a nice change. So
wow. No, I mean, I love how you speak about the choices that you've made, the boldness, the taking chances, and just like showing up fully. And you're memorable because you do, like, you just show up and you're such a open heart and ready to go kind of person. And it shows in the work that you've done and how quickly, like 2018 wasn't that long ago, and a few years before that. And like how quickly you have really created such a name for yourself and have done such amazing projects that you work on. So this audience, I think you're probably aware, is like independent music makers
yeah,
making music. They're part of a community here, and we create songs every month that for different sync agencies and licensing agencies. And I would love to hear some like in the trenches of the work that you do when it comes to supervision. You get the project, and how do you actually start pulling songs, or how do you actually, like, what's the process?
yeah,
I think it's incredibly important as independent artists and music makers to understand the role of other people in the industry, like your fellow people. It helps educate you and know like what amazing work you're doing so that they can show up better as a better partner, as a better key player in the industry as well. So yes, love to hear.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it really varies depending on the project.
Sure.
which is kind of part of the fun of this job is that even though it's a lot of the same sort of actions that we're doing, listening to music, obviously, clearance, whatever, but it's kind of a different process to navigate for each project. So that does keep things fresh. But it largely is dictated by the budget. Um, so just knowing kind of what we have to work with allows me to start listening within particular sort of tiers of what I would expect to be like price tiers of different types of music. So, for example, if there's like barely any money at all, most likely libraries will rely on libraries quite a bit, or independent artists. With the sort of thought of let's not take advantage of independent artists because there's so little money. Let's see if we can get most of that to go to one person, sort of create the right opportunities, depending on what makes sense for the different needs. But when there's more budget, often it'll be reaching out to our partners as from labels and publishers, licensing companies, like you mentioned. When budget's completely open, that kind of opens things up to listening freely on Spotify or Disco, or whatever. But usually it's a mix. Like it's kind of but budget is always limited to some degree, even on the biggest projects I've worked on. So it's a matter of finding where to allocate those resources, which spots are kind of the most important and featured, and then like which spots are kind of more in the background. And that's thankfully like independent artists have really come through for me, and I know so many of my music supervisor colleagues, and just being flexible and easy to work with, and and the sync agents who represent independent artists as well, kind of sort of following that same trend. So it's been important to understand the landscape of who's out there making the music, representing the music, um, and yeah, just kind of keeping both notes, some hard notes on my computer and my systems, but also just like mental notes of who I can reach out to for what kind of music, and what makes sense, because I don't have time to listen to hundreds and hundreds of tracks usually for a single spot, so I have to be a bit targeted. And at this point, over these years, I've connected with enough people that it's hard to be so it's hard to be generous with all of the opportunities. So you have to kind of think more critically about what makes sense for each spot in each project.
I like that so much. You've touched on some really important pieces. One, like flexible, easy to work with while still navigating the like advocating for the independent artist, and yet being open to the opportunities, as an independent musician. So that's such a great point to make. And then targeting. So I think that also works in terms of as a music maker, you can be it is true you can do everything, but if you do something really well, like being known for that, so that you might come up on Julian's radar as that's the person to go to when I need that one thing, like they're really great at that, and being kind of really creating creating some sort of storyline, picture line, branding around that, so that it's clear for you when you're just quickly trying to remember off the top of your head 1 trillion songs that you get a day, like,
Yeah.
oh, that one really stands out, or that artist really stands out. I also wanted to dive a little deeper, and I think like, oh, music supervisor, like, let me send them my music. Can you speak to something about how, like, you're not, like, as a music supervisor, you're going by like the pitcher, the budget, the producer, like I'm sure you have your favorite songs that you can't put in because it's not the right fit for the scene. And somebody might send you music, but it's not something that you're working on right now. Can you share a little bit of how that process works, to help people understand the shoes that you're walking in when you're picking songs and working, compiling your songs and your playlist?
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on that I would love to be able to play songs that are my personal favorites. A lot of the time, that's not possible. Sometimes it is, and that's really gratifying when those two worlds align. But yeah, I'd say that the process, it can look a number of different ways. One, working with different showrunners or directors, we can often work collaboratively from the beginning with some kind of general tone playlist, which could be a Spotify collaborative playlist or some kind of back and forth, series of playlists or disco or whatever. It could just look a number of different ways, but that often is a good way to kind of like establish a dialogue with the key decision makers and just, they'll have references to begin with pretty much, but like our job is to serve their vision. You know what I mean? Like we are music supervisors, but that title is slightly misleading sometimes because we are really just working like every other department in the service of the director or showrunner's vision for what the show should sound like, and that allows us to be really creative most of the time, but it's still sort of like feeling out this mutual landscape of like what will sound right, what will feel right, and that's often well before we have picture. So that's another, I think, a common misconception is that we really don't have access to picture always from the very beginning.
Interesting. Yeah.
If we're brought on during pre-production or during production, which is common, we're reading scripts and we're sort of figuring out where in the script the breakdown would be for the music, and often the sort of first order of priority is just kind of finding the music that will need to be cleared before the shoot, like on-camera performances and things like that. But it can extend to just sort of it should extend to getting a sense of the vibe of, what this show is and how to music supervise it properly. So then often it'll be like that kind of collaborative dialogue with the director, and then more sort of boots on the ground would be sending bins of music to the editors who will be pulling directly from there to start temping, meaning like providing like a sonic roadmap for what the show would sound like. So finding the right music to kind of just like get the process started with those initial cuts, the editor's cuts kind of is a good starting point. And often, we are brought on later than that point, and so it's kind of like damage control if that's the case, and then they've pumped in all kinds of stuff that we can't afford or isn't clearable, or and so it can really look a number of ways, but finding the right music to, especially if it's a show that where budget is concerned, or there's frequent scenes where we need to provide bins of music that would play in like the background, say in a restaurant or a bar that keeps coming back in the scripts, then we'll be like, okay, we should kind of like discuss what the sound of that location is, and figure out, get pitches for this specific price tier, which feels fair for this kind of background use. And that will often end up populating the soundtrack. That's kind of, I've seen that be a very successful way of getting a lot of the work done. And then like you can really focus on just the featured montages and sort of more big ticket items as you go along. But oftentimes those bins really come in handy for the background, and even sometimes the editors will pull a song that they like that was intended for background use, but then works well for a featured use somewhere else. So.
My next question was going to be, how do you work with editors? And you really got into that and answered that and gave us some golden nuggets on what's happening in the background and all the people that it takes and the creative process, and then what can happen if you're brought in after, when they're already like temping things in and bringing back budget, bringing back clearance. Can you share a story? Actually, two came to mind. One being like one of your favorite, most memorable licenses that you did. And maybe, I don't know if you've ever had one that kind of was like rocky or iffy, or like it went wrong, or the clearance ended up not being what you thought, or something like, can you share kind of like both sides of the story, or two stories?
For sure.
Hey, indie music creator. You do not have to live in a major city to have success in sync. You do not need to be young. You do not need to spend a ton of money. You can create amazing music and get it to the right people with a little bit of community support and accountability. That all exists within our community, Sync Society. We bring in a licensing agency every month that we partner with who gives us sync briefs. You have the opportunity to write to these and submit to one of our samplers. This sampler is sent to 15 to 20 sync agencies. 60 to 100% of that sampler every month is signed by sync agencies. That means people in our community are getting representation every month in sync. They are creating amazing music. They are meeting supervisors every month. They are getting song feedback and they're getting support and peer support. You can live anywhere in the world. You can show up and be here and feel seen for the gifts and the music that you create in this world and then see some results in real time because of the music you're making. You are invited to join us. Come on over to 2indie.com/sync society. Okay, and now back to the episode.
There's so many interesting examples to pull from. I feel like, one of my very favorites, just partly because it was such an early formative experience for me in the field of music supervision, was working on the show Shrill with Maggie. That was season 1 that I worked on. And so, a lot of this process that I just described went into that, feeling out the tone, reading the scripts, figuring out, what music felt right. And there was a lot of great ideas being thrown around. So by the time we got to post-production in episode 4, I believe, we had a good sense of it. But there was one big spot at the end of the episode that it was going to run over the end credits, but before the end credits, the final scene involved the main character who was struggling with her weight, but sort of reclaiming the word fat as an identity, and sort of basically had grappled with the insecurities as a child. And most of the episode, or a lot of the episode, is in flashback when she's at a pool party and feeling uncomfortable. And then in the present, she goes to a fat positive pool party, and so there's a lot of great music that we found for the background of that. But the very last scene is a flashback that it's really a tender moment where she, as a kid, waited for every other kid who's sleeping over and was at the pool party to go to sleep, and then she sneaks out of the house to go down to the pool and swim by herself and sit on a floaty, and it's very sweet. So we needed a song that sort of felt right for her character, which we had been developing throughout the course of the season, but spoke to that moment. And this is a somewhat lyrically on the nose choice, but we went through rounds of trying to figure this one out because it felt like a significant character moment. And something that I pitched was "Okay, Meet Me Underwater" by Jason, who's a great indie singer-songwriter that I like a lot. And I think it had just come out as well. It was a pretty recent release at that point. And it just worked so well in the scene.
Wow.
And I felt like that was probably my first really gratifying moment of having pitched something that made it through all the hoops, because I'd pitched a lot of stuff that had worked well in the editor's cut, and then things changed, and then the idea kind of got scrapped, and that happens all the time. And you kind of have to remove your ego from it, but when it does go the distance and everybody loves it, and it's just especially again as an early instance of that, for me, it was just a very cool moment. So that's "Okay, Meet Me Underwater" by Jason. That was really good sync for me.
Wow. It just speaks to the magic. It gives you chills of, imagining that scene, and how the song just has to be so perfect, to speak to the nuances of all the things that are kind of going on underneath that. And what a perfect song to find. Wow.
Yeah,
I love that.
It was really rewarding. And so many other examples come to mind of just quickly to say that there's been times when I've been able to place artists that I'm friends with and that I know personally, and that's hugely gratifying for other reasons, like seeing the independent artists sort of engagement and social numbers and streaming numbers go way up after a placement like that. That can also be just like such a cool feeling, and seeing an artist live, discovering them, and then being able to place them. These things do happen. They're not like, for me at least in my experience, it hasn't been the bread and butter. So when it does happen, like this show I just worked on, Justice USA, the documentary series the prison documentary series, I was able to place this artist Danielle Ponder twice, who has already become a bigger name, but she at the time was not. She was buzzy, but kind of just still under the radar, and she had been a public defender for most of her career and quit her job to pursue music, and it just felt, and her style felt right for the show, but it was also just
Wow.
story was so cool. And I came to her show, which was kind of like an industry showcase type thing. And then I saw her career develop like in real time as I knew that we were going to be placing two of her songs in the series. And that just came out last month. But like in the interim, it was cool to see her develop as an artist. And then those placements, I hope she's psyched about, because it just, yeah, those are other sort of gratifying instances for various reasons. But I'm trying to think of something that's like negative that, there are so many clearance nightmares that I've had to deal with where it's just like, well, what I will say, I'll focus on one that was highly stressful but worked out because I think
Okay.
that's the best. One example of that would be on the show 911. I worked on 911 and 911 Lone Star, and we had a lot of big recognizable songs in those shows, and the sort of cadence of the post-production was very fast. It was kind of like you'd get a script, within a few weeks they'd be shooting. Actually, often it would be like that week or the next week they'd be shooting it, and then within a few weeks you're in post-production. You mix it like after a month, and then it's airing like the next week. So that was kind of the hustle and bustle, and so you're working on multiple episodes simultaneously. Usually, I definitely provided bins of music in the way that I described, but a lot of it's just kind of like big recognizable songs, which can sometimes be difficult to clear, especially quickly. And so it's one of these cases of kind of urgently chasing things a few days before the mix. We'd get kind of like what's called the continuity, which is a list of scenes with descriptions and lengths, and the music continuity would have the list of songs that are in there. And so, an editor would be sending this to me 2 days before we mix the music. So oftentimes I'd have about 48 hours to clear about 5 songs per episode, something like that.
Oh my gosh.
Kind of leaning very heavily on contacts at the major labels and publishers who are kind enough to turn things around quickly as much as they can. But there was one case where we were trying to place a Nick Drake song, and Nick Drake, his estate, I guess it's his heir. I'm not actually clear on who individually it is, but through the label, I heard that his approval party, his estate, was in rural England somewhere, with very bad Wi-Fi. So they wanted to take a look at the show.
Oh no.
They wanted to get a sense of the show before approving. And I think what happened was that, yeah, I offered to send like I had to get permission from the show, of course, but I offered to send a link to a previous episode for reference. And then I was told that they don't have like the connection to even load something like that. So I then, told my contact at Universal, the label, that this show is available to watch on Hulu, like previous seasons. They're like, they don't have Hulu. So I like, provided my personal Hulu login so that
Oh my gosh.
take a watch. Anyway, it was just a nail biter because of the time difference and because of how little time we had. And I think we ended up using 2 Nick Drake songs that season, if I'm remembering correctly, but it worked out, and it was, I believe the publishing had also changed hands in between those 2 uses, and it was just kind of like, yeah, both of them were stressful, and that was a common occurrence, frankly, on that show, just because of the cadence that I described. But that one stood out to me just because of the colorful details of like trying to get, something reasonably simple to the estate of like a really important singer-songwriter, like trying to just show them an episode of TV proved to be challenging. And yeah, there's often all kinds of hurdles that you have to get past.
With the time crunch and the time difference
Yeah.
and the Wi-Fi issues and oh my gosh, yeah. And like that's just one story, as you have said. That's yeah. And so that's why it's, so incredibly important to have that business side of things really dialed in, know like your split sheets, your one stops. Like as an independent artist, it makes you easier to work with and more flexible and helps you do your job and makes you a great partner. In terms of receiving songs, does it matter to you as a music supervisor if the song is retitled or exclusive or non-exclusive with the agency that you
Yeah,
receive it from?
it's a good question. I don't think most of the time I'm privy to that information. Like,
Mm.
I'm sure I could ask sometimes, and I get a vibe occasionally of like, often I'll receive the same song from multiple companies, and then I recognize that there's some challenges with that because I want to make sure if I do end up using that song that I choose fairly, like which company I license it from. Often I mean, I would have to kind of rely on who sent it to me first and dig around for that information. Occasionally that's become an issue, but it's really not, for me, it hasn't been like a huge issue. I know that there's a lot of conflicting opinions about exclusivity.
Yeah.
But I do get the sense that with exclusivity that companies are sort of prioritizing a bit more their artists who are exclusive. But with retitling, it's not something that I have come into contact with a huge amount. I hope that it's kind of a thing of the past at this point, or almost. I know there are certain libraries that will still, or certain sync companies that will still do that.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, until I kind of learned what that was, which wasn't that long ago, I kind of just didn't think too much of it. I just was told, by the licensor, this should be listed as this prefix, then the song title on the cue sheet. And I was like, okay, why not? I'll just take your word for it because that's just what we do with cue sheet information. But obviously, then I learned what that meant, and I was like, it feels, not the most artist friendly practice, frankly. So I don't necessarily like avoid the companies that I know who do that, but I think that like um, I would recommend to artists to find other companies to work with. So yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's because I think it is one of those things that's like used to be done, is rarely done. Some agencies are just kind of known for that's their way, practice. And then I've heard a little bit of like a rumbling of, oh, maybe we should start doing that again. And I'm like, I wonder like what from the other side of the coin, from the supervisor who's actually receiving the music and has to go through the clearance of it, like what your perspective. So that's really great to, just interesting to hear. It's great insight.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my other question is your music. This piece of the puzzle, I was like, whoa, okay, your music that you're making and the show that's happening now, or it recently happened, or it happened. Tell us about your music.
Sure. Yeah, so as I said at the beginning, I kind of got into music supervision from uh, the angle of being a musician myself. And that at first was, like I said, writing pop songs, which is something I still do, but I ended up writing musical theater in college and then have recently picked back up again with that, actually. So now I have written another musical finally since then. So, I've written 3 full musicals, which has been a really cool experience. to see them come to life, like that's a thrill, and to be a part of like the production and the workshopping of it. So that's something I did when I was in college, and then a little bit in New York, and then in LA workshopping and sort of producing a stage reading of a musical I wrote, and then now actually just trying to find an opportunity to put up this new musical that I've just finished. So if anyone has any ideas, I would be open to that. But yeah, basically, musical theater was a big part of it, is a big part of it. But I I've explored various kinds of composition. I think the show you might be referring to, Sana, is the one that I did a couple of years
Said
ago.
something about San Francisco, but I
Yeah.
wasn't sure like the timeline, if that was current or just in the past or.
Yeah, that was a couple years ago. I wrote, it was about an hour's worth of music, like experimental electronic music for a dance production that happened in San Francisco at the Exploratorium there, which is a cool space, kind of an outdoor site-specific contemporary dance production called Here Now, choreographed by this woman named Alyssa Mitchell. And so I was writing music for that. It was kind of like it was a very cool process of just like conceiving of music that would work for different meditation practices. That was what the dance was centered around.
That's cool.
Yeah, I was new to meditation. I still haven't really done as much as I would have liked myself. But writing the music for it was really neat, and kind of like this is not typical ambient music. This is more like music that feels meditative, but is more active tonally because of the dance that was happening. So yeah, that was a great
Can we
experience.
hear it somewhere now if people want to look it up?
Yeah, if you're interested, it's I will preface by saying it's um not just like everybody's cup of tea, frankly. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah. No, I mean, it was.
specific. Yeah, but it's called the artist project that I released it under is called Charivari. The album is Here Now, and yeah, you can find that on Spotify or wherever you stream music. And I now am working on some new sort of singer-songwriter, but like where I'm singing but and wrote songs, but they're more like indie pop songs. So I have like a new artist project that I am hoping to release later this year. And
Oh, wow. I really can't wait to hear you singing. That's
thank
going to
you.
be
Yeah.
amazing. Wow.
Uh,
And so will we find, I guess we'll just have to keep tabs to hear that
Yes,
coming
I
out
believe
soon.
it will be Julian Sometimes will be the name of the artist project. And yeah, I haven't figured out any of the logistics around the release, but yeah, I hope to put that out soon. Yeah.
Well, we'll be watching for it. That's super awesome. Yeah, I loved reading that and to hear about your parents and music supervisors are kind of this really interesting job where you have to love music, and also there's like the admin side of things and the business, all the politics that you have to kind of like tread and walk, and all of the pieces come together in this place called music supervision. And to see what your background is and your parents' background and how you're creating music and how all those pieces work together, it's always a difference for different people, and it's so fascinating and interesting. Thanks for sharing. All right, well, we are closing out this interview. I would love to close things up with, as a music supervisor, I know you are such an advocate for the independent artists. You are an artist. You have parents that are creators. Like, what is some of the advice that you have for music makers in the temperature that we have right now? The industry is always changing. It's always evolving. It's ebbing. It's flowing. So what is some of the advice that kind of just like comes to the top of your head when you're talking one-on-one with an artist?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think learning as much as you can about all aspects of the industry, which I'm sure by being here, by virtue of your attendance and part of this program, like you're already on your way there as far as sync goes. But there's so many areas with what it takes to be an artist, streaming, distribution. There's touring. There's all kinds of areas sort of learn more and dive deeper into. And I guess that, you don't have to be actively engaging with all of them, but if you are full-time pursuing an artist career, those would be things to consider, and to just sort of just listen to podcasts and figure out, attend webinars, just sort of immerse yourself in as much information as you can. As far as sync goes, I would certainly reiterate that having all of your collaborators on board for one-stop representation is really important. Getting a sync agent to represent you is highly encouraged, and just being sort of available to pitch and clear music quickly, that's kind of the name of the game. And I personally would advocate for writing music that feels authentic to you, and not chasing. I mean, certainly writing to a brief is one thing, but not reorienting your entire objective around sync, and not writing stuff that is only usable for sync and otherwise not really interesting. So I've seen a lot of really talented musicians go that route and kind of lose some of the soul that they had originally, or just in those particular pieces of music, maybe not permanently lose their soul. But it's just making sure that you're doing stuff that feels artistically fulfilling, and not. I know that can feel sometimes at odds with the practical demands, monetary and sort of practical logistical demands. But I think just finding a balance is really important. Not being too hard on yourself. This is a really hard career. I mean, I've seen my parents go through that. Personally, I get that. It's just so being persistent is important, and believing in yourself, putting your stuff out there, being fearless, is worthwhile.
Well, there's nothing more to say. That's it. That was awesome. That was beautiful. And I love just the reminder to stay true, bring that soul to everything. Even if you're leaning more towards writing for that brief, how can you infuse it with your personal something that makes it really come alive and feels fulfilling for the process of creating it? Because that's what we feel on the other end too when you're listening to something. So, great. Thank you so much for taking the time, for being here today, for sharing your insights, and just being a part of an advocate in this industry for music makers and being one yourself. Thank you.
My pleasure, Sana. Thanks for having me, and thanks everybody for being here.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
A special shout out to Daniel Lim for providing this incredible music to our podcast, and Kurt Hunter, our editor.
Big thanks to our patrons on Patreon: Holger Willebrandt, Carolee Garrison, Daniel Trilk, Ted Meyerson, Willow Speak, Mark Stone from the Dirty Country Band, Lisa Dunn, Gabrielle Tarrin, and Claire Heaton. We can't do it without you. Thank you so much for your support.